My name is Michael, and I don't give a damn what anyone says. The clowns are real. I know because me and my friends were almost killed by some of them. Everybody thinks that clown phenomena is something that came out of the release of the movie It. And while there were some stunts involving clowns at that time, New Line Cinema released a statement claiming flatly that they had no connection with any of it. Even if they had done some viral marketing, though, that is hardly the entirety of the story, and it's definitely not where it begins. Hell, this shit's been going on for at least 60 years based on documentation alone. But I've recently found evidence that suggests that this cult, and yes, it is a cult, goes back further than that. Way further. As far as I can tell through my limited research, these clown sightings and the vile criminal activities that coincide with them have been happening since at least the 15th century. Most of what I've learned suggests that there's a distant beginning for all of this, and it comes directly from books I had to actually go find at occult bookstores and older libraries. There's not a lot of evidence to support my findings online. At least not anymore. Online research isn't always reliable for a multitude of reasons, but I know now that I can't actually trust online information anymore, at least not on this subject. The reason for this is simple. Someone seems to be deliberately removing historical evidence of the clown phenomenon. I've literally witnessed this in almost real time, where I'll find an online account of some clown-related happening, pre-1980s, and go to share it, only to find later that it's mysteriously been removed, or that the site just goes down. I don't know who is doing the removal, but this has happened at least 7 times now, with shared accounts from books I've actually read being removed. It's like someone or a group of someones doesn't want anybody to know the truth about how long this has been going on. Any record of it happening before the 1960s seems to get completely removed. But at any rate, I'm pretty well versed in what I guess you could call clown lore, which I never expected to know anything about, but which became an obsession after what happened in 2017. At the time, I lived in a place called Bailey's Harbor, which is a very small, somewhat remote town on the shores of Lake Michigan. We were only about an hour drive away from Green Bay. My friends and I are all pretty normal, at least at the time. I don't think any of us were what most people would call normal anymore. We went to school, went fishing at Kangaroo Lake, and sometimes boated on the Big Lake, which is what we sometimes called Lake Michigan. Anyway, we were, for all intents and purposes, your average teenage kids. We played a lot of PUBG, we played hockey, and we tried and failed to get laid on a regular basis. But around the end of September that year was when folks in Bailey's Harbor started seeing clowns. There'd been the sightings in Green Bay back in 2016, sure, but folks in town didn't start seeing them until about a year later, which was weird to me because there'd been a lot of fuss over them the year before. And I remember being really ramped up about it, because of the police responses all over the US and even in the other countries, but the sightings in Bailey's Harbor got very little traction. And I wonder if that's because of what had happened. Bobby was the first to hear about the clown sightings in school, from a kid in his English class, and he immediately told me between classes. I'd heard a few things about it from various kids, but it all sounded like bullshit, until I heard from Bobby. David, who was homeschooled, hadn't heard a thing until we all told him that night on PUBG. There'd been at least 2 sightings of clowns coming out of the woods near Ridge's sanctuary, and there were 2 distinct sightings of 2 individuals dressed in different clown outfits. Now, pretty much everyone in town insisted that it was one person who was wearing different costumes, and that it was likely just a kid messing around. Before the night in question, my friends and I did as well, though we kind of jokingly speculated about them being psychos, I think. Then there were more sightings, and it wasn't just the number of reports, but who reported them that made the whole thing really scary. Emma Downing, who is still the sweetest lady in town, anybody will tell you, made the first official police report about the clowns. She said that she'd seen 2 of them hanging around near the edge of her property, near a tree line, which was basically the edge of a park preserve. She told the police that they were coming out into her yard at night and whistling. A few days after she made the report, her dog went missing. Actually, a lot of people had animals missing. But the next big sighting was at a Bailey's Harbor Lower Range Light, which is a big long name for a lighthouse. The person who was called was actually a tourist and reported seeing a rather large number of people dressed in clown costumes. Now apparently these people approached the tourist's car and tried to get them to get out of the vehicle, which the person almost did, thinking it was a joke, before seeing that one of the clowns was carrying a knife, and he sped away. Now, to be fair, our police department, while small and not particularly in their element, took all of the sightings very, very seriously. This kind of thing just never ever happened in Bailey's Harbor, and we had and still have virtually no crime. So people were understandably pretty damn scared, especially when the pets started disappearing. The police camped out near the lighthouse and a few other locations where the clowns had been seen, but nothing ever came of it. I'd actually heard a story that the police did spot some people and chased them into the woods, but quickly lost them. I'm not actually sure if it's true, but I can't imagine Officer Leeds, who I know was pretty pissed about all of it, wouldn't have just shot one of them. And knowing what I now know, I wouldn't blame him. But these sightings continued well into October and ramped up heavily as Halloween approached, which had some folks wishfully thinking it was just all a prank. Then Carol Winston got chased into the Bailey's 57 diesel station by one of them, who slammed on the glass door repeatedly after she'd gotten the manager to lock it. The police set a mandatory curfew of 8 p.m., and there was a lot of talk of canceling trick-or-treating, which bummed a lot of kids out. My own personal story starts on October 21st of that year, when Bobby, David, and I decided to go to a local zipline place. It was something we did from time to time because Dave's family's house was near to it, on Ridgeview Road, and we could hike through the woods near his house in about 20 minutes to get there. It was kind of a thing for tourists, but it was fun and cheap when we did it as a group, which our parents didn't mind. Now I know that with everything going on, this might seem kind of dumb, but almost all of the sightings were pretty much closer to the center of town, and we've done this hike like 100 times. Sometimes we just run it even if we weren't going to do the zipline, because there was a neat little pop shop on the property. We knew the way there like the back of our hands, and that's probably the only reason why we're alive. Dave's mom made us lunch that afternoon, which I remember vividly, because quite honestly, she was hot. And her sandwiches, whew, they were delicious. Yeah, I was obsessed with her. But anyway, afterwards, we were headed out to the zipline place through the backyard. Even though Dave lived there, Bobby always led first, because he was the guy who originally suggested the route, but also because he was kind of a trailblazer. Still is, actually. So, he went to our, start tree. Now, I really don't know what else to call it, but it was this huge, beautiful red maple that we always went to sort of start the journey. And that time of year, its leaves blanketed the ground in a gorgeous layer of crimson. And I remembering wondering how long that would last before the snows covered everything in white. One of the reasons we stopped at this tree every time is because it was where Dave's dad had built him a treehouse, which we hung out in when we were younger. It had since fallen down, but we used some of the wood to make a crate where we stored stuff, including some hiking sticks, which were made from the leftover treehouse wood. Dave's dad, who was a hobbyist woodworker, had carved the staves into these amazing shapes, which made all of us feel like fucking Gandalf when we went hiking at his house. It was great. We took the trail with some speed that day and made it to this huge rock which marked roughly the halfway point to the zipline place. We always stopped here for a breather, both because we'd usually be tired, but also because the place was just cool to be in. The boulder was taller than any of us, and was being engulfed by this nearby oak tree. It looked awesome. It was also a decent place to have a good sit or even to monkey around. So we stopped there and we sat for a minute. And even though Bobby was kind of itching to fly down that wire that day, he had so much energy, he climbed up and sat on top of the big rock the minute we hit the clearing it was in. We chatted idly about stuff in school. A girl that had moved onto Dave's street, who he said was pretty good at sports. But we were just all kind of shooting the shit, really. We had only been talking for about 5 minutes when we all heard something coming from the other side of the big rock and got quiet to hear what it was. After only a moment, someone on the other side of the rock giggled. It was a guy, and it was loud as shit. Bobby spun around on his perch atop the rock, while Dave and I circled around to see who it was. Now, clowns didn't even come into my mind at that point. I just thought it was other kids, and hoped there were girls. Kinda had a one-track mind back then, I guess, if you could say. But when we got to the other side of the rock, there was nobody there. We could hear giggling coming from the tree line to the north clear as day. And when I heard the giggling, like really heard it, I'm not going to lie, I was afraid. I half pulled Dave back behind the boulder and urged Bobby to get down off of it, but he refused and just stared over at the tree line. The giggling persisted for a moment or so, and then drifted off further into the trees to the north. We sat there and listened as it got more and more distant from that area, until we finally couldn't hear it anymore. Bobby looked down at me and Dave, a confused and nervous look on his face, but I just shrugged and said what we were all thinking. These fucking clowns, right? Now I want to pause here to mention an item in the research I've been doing since that day. As I've said, I've become quite versed in what I call clown lore, both the innocuous, public, and mainstream, as well as the bizarre and occult aspects. But firstly, I want to say that I'm not trying to trash people who make a living as a clown, or even people who want to dress up as clowns for Halloween, or anything like that. There are plenty of people who do just that, and it's all harmless fun. But I've discovered that there are others who are less harmless. In my research, I found a book, which I am only able to read at the library who has it, because there is only one copy. I'm also not going to mention where the library is because I don't want the book to suddenly disappear, but I am slowly making a digital copy of it with my phone. And the book is called The Ludibrium Obscurum, which translates to Dark Mockery. This book details a number of bizarre rituals involving dressing up in motley, painting one's face, and mocking those around you, as you are mocked. There's a lot of weird shit in it, but one of the reoccurring aspects is of something called the Risus Tenebrarum, which translated means the laughter of darkness. It is a laughter which emanates from a darkened or shadowed place beyond sight, like a cave, an unlit structure, or the shadowed boughs of a dense forest, like the one we were in. Now this laughter supposedly harkens to or heralds the arrival of Cordon, or the Corydon of someone named Cordon. I'm not sure. But the word actually means clown in Latin, and it's derived from an earlier Greek name meaning at once a crested lark, battle-ready, and someone who is a companion. I have no idea what the connection here is, which is part of why I'm sharing this story, in the hopes that someone else might know more. I think it might have some connection to the crested lark being a companion, and how its call is rather like laughter. It could also just be the name of this entity. Anyway, we stayed there at the rock just for a bit longer, and I guess waiting to see if it would come back. But it didn't. Bobby seemed tense, but Dave and I just wanted to get to the zipline place and have some fun, so we kinda urged him off of the rock and kept going. Honestly, at that point, I just kinda wanted to find other people who were not standing in the woods laughing ominously. The rest of the journey was uneventful, especially as we didn't talk for the 10 more minutes that it took us to get to the zipline place. We paid our fee and took our time doing the whole course. I think partially to delay heading back through the woods to David's house. I even suggested stopping for a pop at the shop there, and neither of my friends argued. We hung out at the pop shop for like half an hour, still just kind of bullshitting. And I kind of tried to flirt with the older girl behind the counter, as I always did, and as always, she let me down gently. Bless her. Finally, we couldn't justify waiting any longer, and had to start back to Dave's house. Emma suggested that we take the road back, but it's kind of a highway and you're really not supposed to be walking along it. But I know for sure that we all also didn't actually expect anything to happen. At least not anything that we couldn't handle. So we just all kind of tried to power through, and it was all unspoken as well. Bobby, David, and I never actually acknowledged the laughter, outside of me calling it out in the moment. We also didn't discuss our collective fear, which was palpable. But again, only in the back of our minds did we actually expect something to happen. Whatever expectations we had of making it back to David's house without event were thrown completely out the window when we got to the clearing with the boulder again. I had planned to suggest that we just blaze on through, but before I could even get the question out, Bobby shouted a curse, and when I looked up to see what he was looking at, hell, I almost screamed. The entire back of our little hangout boulder was completely smeared in pretty fresh-looking blood. There were also 3 pristine, almost white animal skulls on top of it. One was a bigger dog, one was a cat, and one looked like it could have been like a pug skull, which made me immediately think of Mrs. Downing's missing pupper. Bobby started to look everywhere, clearly expecting us to get jumped from behind or something, while David shakily pulled out his phone and tried to call his mom. I was just frozen, staring at the blood in the skulls. I was so confused and weirded out, just at the logistics of it. Had we missed the blood on our original pass-by? It wasn't likely something that we would have missed, but that means that all of this had been set up in the time we were at the zipline place, which meant that whoever did it likely meant for us to find it. As though in response to my own internal bewilderment, laughter echoed out into the clearing again. From behind the rock, only this time it was coming from the other side. Whoever was out there was between us and our way back to the safety of David's house. I shook myself out of my confusion and gripped my staff tightly and held it up defensively as Bobby shouted out for whoever it was to show themselves. And definitely in response to Bobby's demand, a figure stepped out from behind the boulder, dressed head to toe in bright blue, purple, and yellow clown clothes. Whoever they wore a pretty typical clown mask with an evil grin, blue markings under the eyes, and a pout of red hair coming out of either side. They wore white gloves on both of their hands, and both of them were soaked red with more blood. Now, I don't remember what Bobby said to them at first because all I could remember hearing was someone screaming. David went completely nuts, shouting for help at the top of his lungs, and drowned out anything else. From behind us came more shouting as another clown appeared and began mimicking David's behavior. This one held up his hands in a mocking appeasement as he approached us from behind, which only made David panic even more. Now, I was so terrified in the moment that I genuinely thought I was going to shit my pants. But I managed to hold my nerve and my bowels, and I stepped in front of David protectively. This new guy, who was definitely a guy, kind of jerked at me like he was going to do something, and I jumped and was definitely startled, but I didn't move. I remember being really proud of myself in that moment because I knew that I wasn't just going to let this guy hurt my friend. The knowledge of that kind of emboldened me, and I stared the clown down, or tried to. When I looked in this guy's eyes, which I could see through the holes in his mask, they were bloodshot, like he was really high or hadn't slept or both. Meth is a hell of a drug. The wild, insane look he stared back at me didn't help either. Bobby roared at them both to let us pass, but they just laughed at him. I started doing math because there were only 2 of them, 3 of us. If they wanted to push it, I was ready to bash this dude's head in, if need be. But then another one stepped out from behind a tree. A woman. And let me tell you, she scared the living hell out of me. Her clothes were really old and stained, but still clown clothes, and her mask was made of cloth and leather. That wasn't the most frightening thing, though. The most frightening thing was whose hand she was holding. As the lady clown stepped out from behind the tree, she dragged along a girl who couldn't have been more than 10 years old with her. The little girl wore a purple jumper and jeans, but no coat. She was also dirty around the face and hands, like she'd been crawling around in the dirt. She was crying and looked absolutely terrified. I know for a fact that I grew up right that second. The instant I saw that little girl and processed the implications of her presence, I stopped being a kid. I could feel my innocence just leave me, and all I could think about was how somehow getting her away from here. David seemed to have the same feelings as he shouted out the name Kelly, a name that I didn't recognize when I saw her. The poor thing tried to run to him, but the clown held her hand fast. David screamed for them not to hurt the girl, and none of them moved from where they were standing. Bobby demanded that they let her go and let us pass, but still there was no response until the lady clown spoke. Her voice was so cheerful, it made me wonder, just for a second, if this was all just some stupid elaborate prank. But what she actually said made my heart sink. She told us that they weren't going to lay a finger on the girl, but that we were. Then they'd let us pass like Bobby had demanded, or they'd let the girl go, but one of us had to get hurt. To accentuate our predicament, the female clown produced a dagger, like a medieval dagger, from her pocket, and the other clowns both pulled out weapons as well. The one near Bobby had a ball-peen hammer, and the one near me produced a jagged, rusted kitchen knife. The woman was still and chill, but the other 2 clowns kept shifting their weight, like they were waiting for something to go down, almost eager for it to. I was ready to offer up myself to get hurt if they let the girl go, but I also didn't know who might be waiting to grab her in the trees. However, while I was trying to suss out how this is going to go down, Bobby had apparently decided that he wasn't having any of that shit at all, and he launched his staff down at the lady clown like a spear. It hit her hard in the chest, and she was blasted backward. Bobby shouted for Dave to grab the girl and run, and he tried to, but the clown who was near us grabbed his shirt and pulled at him, bringing up the kitchen knife. I swung my staff and almost cracked the guy in the head, but he dodged it, letting go of Dave's shirt. To his credit, Dave bolted straight for Kelly and scooped her up in his arms. He tore ass from there to get to the other side of the boulder. The clown with the knife came at me all crazy-like, and suddenly I was terrified again because I had no friend to protect. I panicked and backed up, kind of jabbing at the clown as I went. I heard Bobby shouting and cursing and David scream again, but I didn't take my eyes off of this psycho coming at me with this awful-looking knife. Now this clown started growling and hissing and giggling as he was stabbing toward me, and it was all I could do to back away from him. I've never been more scared in my life. His eyes were wide as hell, and he absolutely wanted to kill me. Of that, I was very sure. His last stab caught me in the temple, and I yelped and flailed and tripped over a big tree root. I fell on my side hard and landed on my staff, breaking it and hurting my ribs. And this clown was on me in an instant. He cut my leg and scrambled on top of me to clutch at my throat. His fingers closed around my neck as he brandished his knife in front of my eyes and laughed with pure menacing glee. I could feel my hair being cut off, and I started gasping, or trying to as this psycho was choking me. I was pretty sure I was going to die, and I couldn't believe that the last thing I would hear in the world was this guy's laughter. He kept demanding to know why I wasn't laughing, and didn't I think all of this was funny? Then he said something I'll never forget, because it was one of the most strangest, most unhinged things any living person has actually said to me. "Please laugh for me," the clown choking me out whispered harshly into my face. "If you don't laugh, then we have to kill you. And I'm so lonely in the dark." I started to black out, and the blue sky above me through the trees began to dim. I tried to process what he just said and what it could even mean, but thinking at all had become so difficult. His knife came into view again, and my brain's survival instinct kicked in. And I suddenly remembered that I also had a knife. Suddenly, I came back to reality for just a moment and squirmed and scrambled for the pocket knife my dad had given me on my last birthday. I always kept it in the lower pocket of my cargo pants, and when I reached in and found it, I whipped it out, snapped it open, and drove it into this clown's ribs as hard as I could. The clown screamed and let go of my neck as he fell off of me. I gasped for air, but immediately began crawling away from him as fast as I could. He roared behind me in rage and pain, but didn't seem to give pursuit. I grabbed a hold of the root that I tripped over and used it to steady me as I got to my feet. And when I finally got up, I stumbled back over to the clearing. Bobby was standing over the clown who had the hammer, holding this small pocket hatchet that I recognized as one he'd used before, but didn't know that he'd had on him. The clown had a gash in his forehead, but oddly, there didn't seem to be any blood. On the other side of the boulder, the female clown was getting to her feet, but David and Kelly were nowhere to be seen. Bobby turned and looked at me and pointed behind me, and I turned to see that the clown I'd stabbed was getting back to his feet. I'd stabbed him through 2 of his ribs for sure, but again, there was no blood on the clown, and none on me except for what was coming from the cut on my head. How could he not have been bleeding? I heard Bobby scream for me to run, and I bolted away into the direction where he'd been standing. As I passed the clown that Bobby had struck, I knew he was dead because he wasn't moving, and I could see that the wound was deep within his skull. The female clown screamed insanely at me as I passed the boulder and laughed as she gave chase. I ran my ass off as fast as I was able to, but I knew I couldn't keep up. Bobby was well ahead of me, being a damn fast runner, but he kept looking back to make sure I was behind him. Ahead of him, I saw Dave, who was the fastest of us, carrying Kelly and well ahead of us, which gave me hope. At least if he and Kelly got away, someone would know what had happened to us. He was also shouting his head off for his mom to help. Behind us, or behind me, that female clown kept on chasing. I looked back occasionally and spotted her between the trees. She was gaining on me. She kept laughing and screaming and shouting for us to come back, and how lonely it was in the dark. I did my best to ignore her, pumped my legs as hard as I could, trying my best to breathe and not trip on another root. I could feel the clown behind me, getting closer and closer with each stride, and I knew that she was going to catch up to me before we got to David's house. I resolved to try and hold her off to ensure that the others could get to safety, but just as she'd gotten within 5 feet of me, I heard David's mother calling out from ahead. The sound of her voice gave me the confidence to keep going. It renewed me and seemed to make the clown behind me slow down. I made it to our maple tree and I turned around. When I got to the crate where there was a 2x4, I grabbed it and swung at the clown behind me. When I turned around though, she'd backed off significantly, and her body language seemed defeated. She pumped her hands in disappointment, and then reached out to me with the hand that wasn't holding the dagger.
"Please come back to the dark with us,"
the clown whined at me, mournfully as her hands stretched out for me desperately.
"We can play forever in the dark."
She stomped around and stabbed wildly with her knife, but as I backed away towards David's yard and safety, she howled insanely and took off back towards the boulder. I didn't turn around until I heard Bobby call my name, and when I did, I was so relieved to see Dave's mom, not only because she was an adult and would help us, but also because she was carrying a damned rifle with her. We all went inside and she took care of my head wound after calling the cops. Officer Leeds shows up with pretty much the entire Bailey's Harbor Police Department, and after talking with us, went out into the woods to chase after the people who'd attacked us. When they came back, Leeds told us that they actually found the body of the guy that Bobby had struck, but that the other 2 were gone. The blood and the animal skulls were all still there, though. Later on, after a very lengthy investigation, which included a lot of interviews with all of us, but especially Bobby and Kelly, who turned out to be David's next-door neighbor, we learned that Kelly had been lured into the woods by the woman, where she was grabbed by one of the guys. They'd forced her to crawl around in the dirt and the leaves and apparently dance and tell jokes. They threatened to kill her if she didn't. And then, when they spotted us, forced her over to the boulder so that they could use her to capture us. Now, none of their behavior made any sense, and Leeds was convinced that they were all just a deranged gang, or that they'd escaped from some kind of mental facility. What was really weird was that, according to the autopsy of the clown that Bobby had killed, he might not have actually killed him. The body of this guy was apparently old, like really old, and the blood inside of him, of which there was little, was black and stank. Leeds couldn't explain it, and nothing else ever came of the case. They never found the other 2 clowns, even after an exhaustive search that had help from the sheriff's department, and they never determined who the dead clown was. It all just went away. There were no more clown sightings, no vandalizations, no missing animals, nothing. It all stopped after that day. Bobby joined the army, surprising no one, and David moved to Green Bay to go to college. I got a job working at one of the local touring boats and literally floated around Lake Michigan for like 4 years. We all dealt with it in our own way. Bobby made himself safe. Dave kind of tried to forget it happened. And I obsessed over it. All of it. I still have way too many unanswered questions, though. Where did they come from, and where did they go? Bailey's Harbor is on a damned peninsula. There's no way they could have evaded a search, especially not when they had a helicopter out there. What did they even want? My research tells me that if these clowns are the ones who wrote the Ludibrium Obscurum, then they'd been around for hundreds of years, maybe even longer. But more than anything, I cannot stop thinking about both why the clown who cut me and what the woman said, and how it relates to the Risus Tenebrarium and the coming of this Corridon. Are they heralds for something much worse? Was their laughter a warning, and in their own deranged minds, were they trying to spare Kelly and the rest of us from something even more horrible? Where did they come from? Where did they go? Was it Cotton Eye Joe? So stupid.